Hi everybody, welcome to the webinar in regards to the marriage between cloud and ITSM. I will be presenting today on behalf of ITpreneurs and Global Knowledge. My name is CJ Bast, and let me pull up the slide here. I'm the guy on the left, and I'm the product manager for ITpreneurs involved in developing the cloud products. And the gentleman on the right is Jurjan Burgers, and he is an independent ITIL expert, and actually understood that he is a triple expert because he went through the ITIL V3 to the manager's bridge course. He took his ITIL expert track with the life cycle track and also with the capabilities. So we have an ITIL expert on staff here. I'll be presenting the first part, and Jurjan will basically do the more ITIL focused slides. And we have a couple agenda points. Apologize for this. So for example, we'll be looking at the personalities, so cloud versus ITSM, do they go hand in hand or not? Then we'll be looking at specifically the ITSM's personality. We'll also be looking at the compatibility between the two, or whether prenuptial is basically necessary. We'll also be looking at the cloud SLA versus an outsourcing SLA, and that's basically to provide you an example of what is really changing within the cloud, or let's say in your environment, if the cloud comes into play. And then last one on the right here is the role change. So what will really change to your role and to your position in working with cloud solutions? So let's get started. And the slide I pull up here is basically a slide that you might think like, oh yeah, that might be me. A lot of people and a lot of our clients, when we speak about cloud, they say, yeah, I've heard too much about it. I don't really know what it is. I don't have time for it right now. And yeah, that's very typical within organizations. However, if you look at some of the statistics that we found, and this is a report that we pulled up from Gartner, it said that within 2 years, 80% of Fortune 1000 enterprises will use cloud. So if your clients or your boss or your staff says, well, I'll wait it out, I mean, 80% of the large companies will use the cloud in one way or another. So cloud is coming whether they or you like it or not. And if we look at some examples of companies that have done well or have not done well, and I'm just going to pull up a couple examples here. The first one is about Blockbuster versus Netflix, and I'm sure the people in the United States are familiar with Blockbuster. They went bankrupt a little while ago, earlier this year. And basically Netflix won the battle versus Blockbuster. And if you look at the Google Trends analysis, which I pulled up here, you can certainly see that already in 2009, if you go to the 2009 year here on the axis, you can already see that Netflix was gaining momentum and Blockbuster was basically losing it. And we went from going to renting a movie in a movie store to basically renting it through the mail, and now renting it online. And Blockbuster was just too late to adopt the new technology, and Netflix did a good job. And as a result, Blockbuster is no more, and we don't really go to movie stores anymore. The medium in which we utilize or watch movies has changed. So the content is still the same. You probably still watch movies. I usually do. We still enjoy them. But the media in which we basically access those movies has changed from going to the store, as you can see here, towards on the right here, just basically accessing a movie on a data center, which is now done, for example, by Netflix. So the technology world has really changed the movie industry. You can probably already tell this example here, books. You used to go to a bookstore, perhaps you still do, and there's some really nice bookstores that have a lot of character, but most of us now read books on the Amazon Kindle or the Sony Reader or an iPad. So again, it's changing here. Same with music. We used to go to music stores, and now a lot of people buy CDs on, for example, the Apple iTunes or Apple iTunes. So we still listen to music, but the way in which we access that music has changed, which kind of brings us now to the world of IT, and I think that's our world. We went from the 5.25-inch floppy disk, which I really didn't like, to the 3.5-inch disk, to the CD. Then we went on to flash drives, which were great, but now we have the cloud. And for example, sending large files, I just did that with like WeTransfer, this beautiful tool, and there's no flash disk involved anymore, and there's much more changes that are coming as a result of cloud. And the difficulty with that change is that it almost touches every aspect of a business. So whether it's sales, whether it's the supply chain, but also product management, product development, for example, developing new applications, it all sees an impact of the cloud. And basically you sign up for this webinar on ITSM, and yes, it also significantly changes IT service management. And to just give you an example of, well, how does that change? Because you can probably thinking, well, great, CJ, but how does it really impact us then? And to illustrate that, and this is more of a talking slide, and I don't really want to ask you to read all these roles, but I just grouped a couple roles. So here it's IT specialists, like application developer, managers, and business analysts. But we also have technical services, so the computer operators, the coordinators, the support specialists. I kind of categorize those under technical services. Project management, also a very important one. If you're interested in PMP or Prince2, certainly recommend those routes, but that's also roles that we see within the IT organization. Also managing vendors, and Jurjen will basically talk about SLA versus outsourcing a little bit later, but those roles also exist within the organization. Architect roles, for example, application architects, business architects, and I can go on for a little bit, but basically this is kind of the roles that typically exist within an organization. And now if we say, well, let's bring all our applications to the cloud, which roles will be impacted? And you can basically look at it for a minute and think, well, what would impact? Let's say we create a private cloud, then all the roles that I colored orange are impacted in one way or another in regards to cloud computing. And that's pretty significant. And for the one role, it might change more. For the one role, for the other, it might change less. But there's impact on all these roles. And then I can even make it a little bit more interesting if I say, well, if we transition all the business critical applications, and that's scenario 2 here, to enterprise cloud, so really bringing it outside of the organization, then yeah, the organization sees a much greater impact of cloud computing. For example, all the roles in red will be significantly impacted. They might still be there, but they might be less in quantity. For example, perhaps there are less business analysts required because the organization is now using, let's say, software as a service or a SaaS tool, as opposed to building it in-house. So there's a lot of roles that might cease to exist or certainly change significantly. But also some roles will actually start to exist. For example, the broker role in green, cloud broker under vendor management, that's a new role that might start to exist. And this is just an example slide, so don't take this as the complete truth. But it's certainly, I think the question that I would ask any organization is, do you know what the impact will be if you are going to heavily utilize cloud computing within a couple of years, within now and 5 years or so? And that's a question that I think everybody should answer for themselves. And then we'll basically get to understanding the cloud personality. So I kind of gave an introduction of the why is cloud so important, and then the next 5 minutes or so I'll just very briefly touch on what do I think is the cloud personality, so we can look at if he or she could actually partner with ITSM. I'm not sure how familiar you are with cloud computing, but I'll just go over this briefly. Basically, in cloud computing, the cloud service provider provides access to the software. It takes care of the hosting, storage, and also helps developers create the applications. The reason that they call it cloud is that you don't really know where your data is located, whether it's in a dedicated data center, perhaps multiple data centers. So that we don't know, and that's kind of in a nutshell cloud computing. And if you look at some of the examples of, well, what is cloud computing, then you will always see these categorizations like software, platform, and infrastructure as a service, probably well familiar to you. but I'll just touch on them briefly. So software as a service means just an application that you use online, such as Microsoft 365, Salesforce.com, Facebook, you're all familiar with. So that's an example of a tool that you access online without having it on your system. Platform, such as Google Apps, SAP, but also Salesforce.com actually has a platform that you can build on. And then infrastructure on the bottom, that's Amazon, for example, or OpenStack. They all provide infrastructure on demand. Then if we look at how are these SaaS, PaaS, and infrastructure as a service deployed, well, there's a distinction there again. We start on the left with private cloud. That's basically an exclusive cloud for one organization. Then we have community cloud, which is basically a service cloud infrastructure provision for exclusive use by a specific community. We also have public cloud, and that's basically what everybody uses for the general public. And then we have the hybrid cloud here on the right, which basically means a combination of the previous ones that I just mentioned on. So that's in a nutshell what the deployment models are for cloud. So remember that we have software as a service, platform, and infrastructure as a service, and then these are the deployment models. And they kind of overcome problems such as, and there will be many more examples that I can give, but running out of capacity, cloud can scale very quickly up and down, so that won't be an issue any longer. Cost of excess capacity, well, sometimes it could be very affordable to have excess capacity, but usually it is not. And with cloud, you use basically what you use and not more, so you don't have excess capacity if you don't need it. You don't need to to pay a lot of capital or put a lot of money in to buy servers and hardware because you just basically use it on demand. There's also downsides of cloud computing. We won't really touch on those during this webinar, as we'll be looking at ITSM and cloud. But these are just some examples, and there will be many more. And I'd say Google is your friend if you want more information. Or you can obviously take a course with Global Knowledge or ITpreneurs to get educated on what cloud actually is. So that, in a nutshell, is what I wanted to provide as an intro into the cloud personality. I'd like to do the same for the ITIL personality. I hope you're still with me. A couple more topics before I hand it over to Jurjen. So right now we'll be looking at the ITSM personality, and is that a good partner to marry with cloud or is it not? I guess we'll have to see. And since this is an ITIL focused webinar, I believe that you're probably familiar with many of the ITIL processes or MAF or any other service management frameworks. So I'll just touch on these again very briefly. You probably all know that ITSM focuses on improving the business IT alignment. That's the top bullet. Provide guidance on activities and frameworks. Also, the life cycle framework to manage and deliver the IT services. Increase the end user satisfaction. So probably that's all familiar to you. But what was interesting when we were reviewing the ITIL 2011 syllabus, and we put that on the bottom here. I apologize for that somewhat text-heavy slide, but it says that providers of IT services can no longer afford to focus on technology, and that might be the cloud, and their internal organization. They must now consider the quality of the services they provide and focus on the relationship with customers. And I think, without jumping the gun here, I think that's kind of in a nutshell the message. You might, as an ITSM professional, be focusing less on the process or the technology itself, but more the business outcome of the service that you are providing. So some of the frameworks that are familiar probably to you is ISO 20000. That's a framework that is used for IT service management. Another one is the Microsoft Operations Framework, and the third one is ITIL. And that's a well-known framework that we use a lot, and again, Jurjen is almost an expert in, actually triple expert, as we said in the beginning. So that's kind of a nutshell, cloud in a nutshell, the ITSM personality. And the next topic will be presented by Jurjen, and that's in regards to yeah, are the two compatible? Can you mix cloud with ITIL? Can they work together or can they not? And what we like to do is include a poll here. So it's poll time, and I will launch it right now. So you'll see that on your screen in just a second. If you can just answer, do you think cloud and ITSM go hand in hand, or do you not? And we'll just take a minute to vote, and then Jurjen will basically take it from there.
Yes, thank you, CG. Let's just wait for the poll here, or?
Yeah, I think almost. Let's get to the majority almost has voted, so we'll give it a couple more seconds. Everybody's probably thinking, well, what does the other person say? And we'll share the results here. You can already tell it's going to be pretty interesting. I'll close it in a second. You have 80% of the people voted, so that's good. I'll share the results with you so you can actually see it on your screen. You should be seeing it right now. So 59% of the people, Jurjen, they say, yes, of course, they go hand in hand. 41% says, well, maybe. And the good thing is that nobody says, yeah, that they do not go hand in hand. I do find it interesting that there's almost a 50-50 split between of course and, well, maybe. So, yeah, I think good food for thought for continuing the presentation on your side, Jurjen, on yeah, are they compatible or not. So I will not speak no longer until the end, and yeah, go ahead, Jurjen.
Yeah, well, thank you, CG, for this stretching out of both worlds, I would say so, both on cloud computing and on ITIL. What I was planning to do for the next sheet for compatibility or prenuptial is just to start with all search we've done on the internet and on Google to see if there is already something written about it. Well, I'm not the only one that that did this exercise, and you will see coming up all these kind of articles and things written and comments and blogs already. So yes, there is of course a big world going on both of these worlds. ITIL and cloud do interfere with one another, and some do think that's a positive action, or some are still doubting it. We saw it on the poll as well. On the poll where, well, nobody says no, but half of people, attendees now, are thinking, well, it might be, but I'm not exactly sure where. Well, in these sheets coming up, let me see for the next one, we will see that there is indeed a very relevant impact of all life cycle stages in ITIL. And what I mean with that is that the ITIL 2011 has a lot of life cycles. It starts to rethinking and repositioning your services from a strategical point of view, financial point of view. Then ITIL goes on with the development, the design, the rollout, operations. And cloud computing really does impact all the processes and thinking of life cycles within the total model. So it changes not only the way IT services are provided, but also how they are leveraged between different providers, if they can be robust offers. I mean, cloud is, of course, a very flexible way of working. And cloud is usage-based of these aspects which are so pure and characteristic for cloud. They need a different approach in managing. So when we look at the next slide, for compatibility, if there is, yes, there is, of course, and it impacts not only the processes in ITIL, but when we look at ITIL as in processes, people and products or technology, you can read it here, it has relevance on all of these aspects. When you're looking now at people, and both service management, IT service management and cloud, they can reduce the costs, improve the quality of the people. I mean, introducing cloud and then especially on a service a software as a service on a SaaS level, you don't need to bother anymore about the infrastructure beneath it. So that also might imply that you don't need any maintenance on this, and hence having less people or administration dealing with the infrastructures and the platform. Of course, where we're using platform as a service, it will be less, and infrastructure as a service only deals with that part of it, but it takes away some people. As we saw in the roles, it also creates new roles, so it has impact on people. Now look at the processes, the next one. Further on, we see a slide where a lot of ITIL processes are in place, and with ITIL processes, you get governance on your service management. You get control and grip on it. So that's ITIL. That's basically what ITIL does for your organization. Introducing cloud means that it also has to alter the way you are processing this. So the processes itself need to be adjusted for cloud computing. Further on, we see some changes. And the next one, the technology or products, as we say, they also go hand in hand with a much more efficiency and improved quality. One of the key technologies used before cloud computing is virtualization. And as we have this in the course, it is also virtualization and cloud computing combined. But it is, well, a pretty startup technology before you can enter the cloud. At least that's when you're providing your own or hybrid cloud or community clouds. And if you're not doing it yourself in your business, your provider might do this for you. So together with virtualization, this has a very impact on the quality and robustness of your environment. Now looking at the changes between the ITSM, service management, and cloud. Got the next share here with some humor attached to it. So once you get married and you have a prenuptial agreement, the process doesn't change when you're entering into a marriage. But once you are doing your own activities, it might, in another contract, get some conflicts of this. So in this image, you has left the seat up and violates the agreement. So what we are saying here is that the activities might still be the same, but some processes and agreements you make with your providers, with your cloud provider, they might alter. So we go to the next one and see some all of these ITIL processes that might impact. This is not a very complete schedule. It is on ITIL version 3, and there is some interesting thing to say that the ITIL 2011 syllabus also adds the business relationship management as a service strategy, which we also see as a process within ISO 20K and others. So there's a distinction of ITIL version 3 and 2011. One of the main topics in this is that APMG also introduced cloud computing in ITIL. Especially the operation functionalities like request fulfillment. So when we look at all these ITIL processes, and again, they're not even complete, there are even more of these.
I'm sorry everybody, it seems that our ITIL expert has dropped off the call. Not sure what has happened, but I'll try to fill in until he can return. And I think the point that Jurjen was trying to bring across is that cloud focuses you to really look at all of the ITIL processes again. So when I pull up the next slide, you see that if you consider adopting cloud computing, you'll have to define some sourcing strategies in relation to these cloud computing services. Then you have to design the services based on cloud computing. You have to construct and roll out these services. Then you will monitor the cloud computing environment, and then you basically try to continue to improve. And like if we look here, for example, these are all of the aspects of ITIL or ITSM, I should say, that are impacted by cloud. And so that, yeah, from services portfolio management, outsourcing, change management, event management, demand management, everything is impacted by cloud computing. And to basically explain a little bit further what will change in the ITSM world versus cloud world, Yuri and I prepared an example of the cloud SLA versus the outsourcing SLA. So if we look at 7 topics in a cloud computing service level agreement versus in the outsourcing world. Hopefully it becomes a little bit clearer as to what exactly will change. So we'll be looking at chain liability, contract duration, exit strategy, talk about security, sharing resources, internet dependability, and the financial model. So if we look at the chain liability, then if the provider is part of a cloud supply chain itself, it might be useful to add an exoneration chapter to the service level agreement. So this is basically to limit or prohibit the responsibility over the data once part of the contract that your supplier has are externalized to another cloud service provider, to subcontractors. Another one that's different is contract duration. Cloud SLAs are much more flexible in terms of contract duration, so make sure that you understand the terms and conditions for changing these terms. Another one is the exit strategy, and again, make sure that an extra SLA paragraph is added to your cloud SLA with regards to this exit strategy. And I really want to make sure that you have, or that you can ensure that your data is delivered back to you in every circumstance, whether they go out of business or you want to change. So make sure that your data is delivered back to you. Next up is security, and I'm sure that you require high or appropriate levels of proof from your service providers that he actually applies security regulations, and most of them do, and most of them also use ISO 27000. And that will include things like entry and physical access, looking at the backup and disaster recovery plans, things like that. So make sure that is also covered in the SLA that you have with the cloud provider. Next one up is sharing resources, and we created this cartoon a while back, and basically it's on the bottom here we explain public clouds are like apartment buildings. You can count on having some noisy neighbors. And what we mean by that is that if you share resources with someone else, if perhaps you don't know even that you have shared resources, then you might be impacted if the other party that's also on your resource is using a lot of the bandwidth or a lot of the computing power. So make sure when you sign an agreement that you know what services to expect. Next up is internet dependability, and I'm sure that you are familiar with this one, that you have to be aware that cloud services rely on internet connections, but make sure that you know exactly who takes responsibility over which part of the supply chain for their account, and ask for insight in their third-party agreements if needed. Financial models, they also change with cloud computing, as instead of buying the server and setting up everything first, and basically having a lot of cash out, now it might become a operational expenditure because now you're using subscription-based prices. So the financial model could also change. So make sure that that is covered as well. So having said that, and hope that example was insightful or gave you some better ideas of what to look for, like what actually changes within your role, and that's what we'll be looking at now. And I'm pulling up this cartoon here because what I think you as an ITSM professional perhaps really need to make sure that you have is knowledge about cloud computing. I think you really have to become an expert in both worlds, so basically understanding both sides of the coin, because the cloud ecosystem is evolving, business requirements are changing, and therefore your roles and skills are changing as well. So make sure you understand ITSM as well as cloud computing. And then if I pull up a couple examples of the roles and skills that are changing, then and I just put a couple examples here on the slides. For example, articulating the business value. So explain that the outcome of the service or the solution. So for example, that you can collaborate better with other colleagues, that you can work from home. Again, explain the benefits of the solution. Employing service-oriented architecture, that really means that now with cloud you have the opportunity to modularize the applications. The third bullet here, evaluating applicability of the service models in cloud. So that means like, do you need to use platform as a service or software as a service or infrastructure as a service, and what's the best solution in every circumstance. And again, obviously those will change depending on the circumstance, so make sure that you can actually assess the applicability. Some more roles and skills, I mean the SLA that we've just discussed, so I'll kind of skip that one. Next bullet down is basically the services and the configuration, integration, and provisioning of these services. So again, the assembly and operations will take on new dimensions, so make sure you understand those. The managing workload on shared resources we kind of touched on as well, in regards to make sure that you understand if you are impacted and if you are using shared resources. And then measuring, monitoring, metering, billing, and reporting. Those all change with cloud, and for example, if you use shared resources, well, how do you actually monitor that, and how do you bill that if the one uses 70% and the other 30%? So again, how do you measure that, and how do you bill that, and again, how do you report it? The last slide here, we kind of touched on a couple of those already as well. For example, financial engineering. So make sure you understand the differences between capital expenditure and operational expenditure as a result of cloud. And also things like cost optimization and proper chargeback models are things that you need to be familiar with. Managing security, access protection, and risks. So again, I don't think it's harder with cloud computing, but different, and make sure that you understand those differences. And after hearing all this, you might be thinking, yes, I do understand that cloud will impact ITIL, but now what? And for that, I just noticed that Jurjen's back on the call. So Jurjen, please provide a key takeaway.
Well, as you can see, ITIL might be as an accelerator in using your new cloud services. It might be an accelerator in thinking again about your services, your positioning, your strategical position, which is in the service strategy lifecycle, of course, from ITIL. A lot of people, when entering cloud, don't know that they are really dealing with ITIL already. They are thinking about a service pipeline, a service catalog, which service should we provide to whom. And when you take the ITIL methodology, it is an accelerator. It can enhance the effort you put in it to go into the cloud. And not only ITIL as a total methodology, but also, and that's the next bullet, the lifecycle concept and processes. You started for a service strategy as the beginning. So where are you wanted to be? Which places in the market would you like to cover? What are the services that you would like to have in the cloud versus on your own premises? So these concepts and processes are also very useful to do. And there's some thinking about this, like in ITIL, it's not only a methodology, but it's also a common language. And CG also mentioned this framework. You can use ISO 20K for governing your service management. Some data centers or cloud providers do use that as a marketing tool, for instance. Like, hey, we have accreditation, we have a security audit, we have ISO 20K governance. And there's also ITIL in this. So even from a cloud provider perspective, ITIL can be a marketing tool as well. But then again, either if you use it as a concept or as a common language or a methodology, it's also a common language. When your customers and your provider are talking the same language, they know what you are saying about when you're entering change management or when you would like to have request fulfillment. An easy, flexible way of making fully use and advantage of cloud is the flexibility that's in it. And especially web portals, web catalogs can enhance that one. So when you are talking about ITIL and your provider does as well, you have the functionality of both, and you understand one another. And of course, this is only a tip of the of both worlds. Are they touching one another? Yes, they are. I really think they are. But ITIL in itself is more like a technology, or sorry, theoretically spoken, it is the key figure to enhance and to enter the cloud. But does it also in practice means that ITIL is capable of deploying a cloud or using the cloud? That's the one that's very contradictory. I mean, in practice, you have ITIL practitioners, you have your process managers, your service owners, your service managers, a lot of people, and CG was just talking about the roles, might be a bit scared of having an entrance to the cloud. They sometimes can talk about their own job. Is it perhaps at stake? Some administration roles might be deleted when you're using cloud services. So in practice, not everybody, although they are understanding ITIL quite well, is willing to use ITIL in its full potential. So there's a difference between the practice and the theory. In theory, yes, I think it's God's gift to cloud computing. It will enhance your thinking about it, your deploy, redesign, manage your cloud operations. But in practice, that might be a difficult one for you. Are you able to have, well, it's the management of change? Are even the ITIL practitioners able to and willing to give full potential from ITIL? And see if that's a new way of thinking, a new way of working. I think that's one of the mainstream messages that we bring along. So in theory, yes, it is, and it does enhance cloud and ITIL, but in practice, it still is a new way of working. And as in every way of working, the processes, the people, and technology are changing, and that's in this case. It goes for this case as well. So that's more or less, in theory, the takeaway that I would like to do. And of course, you can contact us and Koyan for extra information about detail in education, whether it's on cloud or on ITIL. Even for the combination of both worlds, we developed a combined course where we tip in a bit of cloud into the ITIL courses, and also in the cloud course, you will see something about ITIL. So I think this is very useful for everybody, whether you're on business or on service providing side, whether you're on management or on operational level. You should be aware of the possibilities and that both worlds will have to make it a fully good service. Well, that's more or less the wrap up from my side. CG, I don't know if you've got any questions left or additions to make to this.
Yeah, one question that we got was in regards to courses and what would be a good course to start with in regards to cloud computing. So I was just thinking that on this slide here, we kind of mentioned it only very briefly, where we say that the ITIL Foundation and Cloud Essentials courses. So I think ITIL Foundation a lot of people might have already here on this call, but Cloud Essentials is the certification and course that's provided by CompTIA. And I think that's an excellent start as it is a foundation level, introduction level course on cloud computing, which discusses the risks, the benefits, the technology itself, so that you won't be fooled by the techies. So I think that would be a good starting point.
Yes, thanks. Yes.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for staying on the call here and bearing with us while we were having an outage. At least Jurjan did. Jurjan, thanks for being with us today and providing some light on the ITIL personality.
Thanks for covering my part while I was out of internet.
Yes, no worries.
Yeah.
And again, thanks for listening to all the people that attended this webinar today, and look forward to seeing you at the next event. Take care and have a great day.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.